Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the natural history that is right on our doorstep. Our school grounds are fantastic for a whole range of flora and fauna. Here we can see a large white butterfly feeding on this common cranesbill. So here, right outside the front of the school, we have these lovely orange lilies, which obviously aren't native, but we can see that the hoverflies are really loving them. These are actually marmalade hoverflies. They're fairly common, and you can see they've got really lovely patination on their abdomens. So just an example of how easily you can attract pollinators to your garden. Here we can see another marmalade hoverfly that is collecting nectar from this fuchsia. Now the fuchsia isn't a native plant to the UK, but non-native flowers are really beneficial to lots of pollinators. So by the word pollinator, I mean flies, I mean hoverflies, bees, wasps. There are actually thousands of species of wasp that pollinate flowers, which often surprises people because people often think that honeybees and bumblebees are the main source of pollinator in this country. So this is one of QE's wild spaces. We can see that we have some wild flowers here. Now I've already said a little bit about wildlife gardens and having good plants for pollinators. Well, this wild poppy is also a great plant for pollinators. This is quite a common plant seen in fields and hedgerows. We also have common mallow here, and this is often frequented by little beetles, and often if you look you might see a beautiful green iridescent beetle, and this is a lovely contrast to the purple of the mallow. Now lots of people think that nettles are a weed, and of course they might sting you if you touch them, but these are incredibly important plants for lots of different wildlife, including butterflies like the peacock butterfly and the red amaril. They lay their eggs on nettles, and the caterpillars will eat the leaves and then they'll pupate on the nettles as well. So if you have space in your garden, it's really lovely idea to leave a little patch of nettles so that you can provide a home for wildlife. Now, in the background, you might be able to hear in a moment a wren singing. So we'll just listen to see if it's going to sing again. There. So the wren is a really tiny brown bird, and it has one of the loudest calls for its size of any creature, which I think is fascinating. Now, Mr Cottrell, our gardener, when he was here and also now still, has been creating this amazing bug hotel, and you can see that there are lots of different nooks and crannies for insects to make their homes. So we have those hollow bamboo sticks there, and lots of solitary bees make well, they lay their eggs in these hollow areas, and then depending on which type of solitary bee it is, they'll either fill the end of it with some sort of mud, or leaf cutter bees actually cut little sections of leaves and then fill the end in there. So before they do that, they'll collect pollen and they'll collect nectar and make a little protein ball that the grubs will feed on to make them mature, and then eventually when it becomes a bee, then it will be able to force its way out, and then there is a new bee. Over here, also still in our wildlife area, we have what we can see here on these leaves. This is the result of a leaf mining moth laying its eggs, and then the larvae actually exist in the leaf until they will pupate, which is really quite cool. Also over here we have some lovely dead wood, the old stump of a tree, and lots of creatures will use this, including stag beetles. The stag beetle has an incredible life cycle. It spends most of its life underground, so 7 years is the life cycle of a stag beetle, and 6 of those years it will pretty much live in dead rotting wood under the ground. So an absolutely amazing habitat for those. And then the stag beetle really only then lives long enough to be able to find a mate and reproduce. So again, here in our wildlife area, we can see a plant that is often described as a weed. So this is a thistle, but lots of people might not realise that there's actually more than one type of thistle. So in my field guide here, Wildflowers, it's quite an ancient book, but it's really, really good. So we can see here that we've got lots of different types of thistle. Globe thistle, carline thistle, all sorts. Now, if we have a look, we can see the flower here is a lovely purple colour. So that narrows it down a little bit. However, I don't think it's any of these thistles. So we'll turn on to the next page. Okay, so I think that it's likely to be either creeping thistle or spear thistle. So short, tall, creeping perennial. So perennial means that it's something that comes up every year, usually hairless. So if we have a look, we can actually see quite a lot of hairs. So it's unlikely to be the creeping thistle. So then we'll have a look at spear thistle, medium, tall, biennial. So biennial means that it comes up every other year. And we can see here that it says downy, so we can already see that this is probably more likely to be spear thistle. And if you look at the ends of the leaves, you can see that they do look a little bit like spears. Leaves deeply pinnately lobed. Well, we can see here that we've got definite lobes, and they are pinnate as well. Flower heads 20 to 40 millimeters across, often solitary. Bracts often hairless with yellow tipped spines, July to September. Well, we are in July now, so I think we can probably say that this is a spear thistle. And we can see that this bee is absolutely loving the flower. This is a long-tongued bee, and it can get right into those long flowers, because actually this is a whole host of little flowers in there. My bee identification isn't the best, but I'm going to say this is probably a carder bee, which there are also a number of species of in this country. So this is a plant called honesty, and in the summer you can see that the seeds have already been formed, but earlier on in the spring this plant would have had lovely sort of pinky purpley flowers that is great for pollinators. The leaves of this plant are actually the larval food plant of the orange tip butterfly, which is a native butterfly to this country. That butterfly does also use garlic mustard and cuckoo flower or lady's smock as food plants as well. I just wanted to draw your attention. We can actually see a little spider that is using this plant, which is past its best, as an area where it can build its web and catch food. The other interesting thing about this plant is we can see that we've got these seed pods, and if you look closely you can see the seeds inside the pod, and these, once they have dried out completely, will burst open, and then all you will have is the empty shell of the seed pod. These ones aren't quite ready yet, although this one here is looking like it's going to explode soon. Here at QE, lots of our grounds are actually right next to the churchyard, and this is also a fantastic habitat for lots of wildlife. We've got a really old tree over there which lots of birds and insects will be using to either roost in or to feed on the leaves, etc. So we can hear some birds chirping away in the background. We've got the wren over there again, very loud, and we can see that there's lots of bramble, and again people think that these plants aren't really that nice to look at, but they are such valuable resources for lots of insects, and the berries provide food for birds and young fledglings. So really we're very lucky to be on the edge of this in our school. Okay, so I'm now around by the tech block at another area where there are lots of things to see. So this little wildflower here is called self-heal, and it's a wildflower, and you can see them in many areas of grassland, and you can see that these particular flowers are quite good for long-tongued bumblebees because their corolla is quite long and narrow, and that attracts the bees in, and it's purple as well, and often bees go for purpley coloured flowers. If we look over here, we've got some dock, a rumex species. There are lots and lots of bugs on there, all enjoying feeding on that plant. Now here we've got another plant which is often described as a weed, a notifiable weed, but it's a really, really important species for one particular species of moth. Now this is the caterpillar of the cinnabar moth, and the yellow and black tell birds that this is not a nice caterpillar to eat. We can see that it's also got some hairs on it. Oh, not quite focusing. There we go. It's got some hairs on it, so we don't want to touch it because that would possibly irritate our skin. This flower is a yellow flower. I can't actually see any of it in flower. Oh yes, over there. So we've got some of it in flower over there, but the caterpillars will be eating the leaves, and the moth is a lovely bright sort of crimson with some black on it, and these are day flying moths. Often people think that moths only fly at night, but in fact there are many species which fly in the daytime. More on moths later. To lots of people this might just look like a bit of a mess. However, this is a perfect area where you might find a hedgehog nesting. Not that you should disturb them, but hedgehogs in the daytime and in the nighttime need areas where they can rest and areas where they can nest. And these are sort of perfect areas, little wild areas with sort of old branches, new branches, all sort of stacked up on top of each other. And this is the sort of area where you might find them. So here on our school playing field we have a couple of different types of gull. Now those of you who know me quite well will know that I do not appreciate it when people call gulls seagulls. So here we have a black-headed gull on the right hand side, and on the left hand side, just underneath the rugby posts, we have a Mediterranean gull. And the way that we can differentiate between these two gulls is that the Mediterranean gull actually has a blacker head than the black-headed gull. It also has quite red legs and a really quite dark red bill as well, in comparison to actually the kind of chocolatey-headed black-headed gull. The black sort of feathers actually only go back partially on the head of the black-headed gull, whereas there's sort of a collar on the Mediterranean gull as well. So these two gulls are quite small gulls in comparison to the rather large herring gulls or black-backed gulls that people often refer to as seagulls. We do often get black-backed gulls and herring gulls at school here. Oh, there's one just flying across now, and they're the noisiest ones that we see and hear at school. Just a bit of a closer view of the Mediterranean gull, just walking along by the mugger, taking advantage of all the little bugs it can find amongst the grass. This little dandelion here is clearly a big hit with the tiny little bugs. We can see lots of different types of bug here. So we've got some what looks like thunder beetles, and we've got some really, really small little flies as well. We can see that we've got the dandelion shaped leaf here. There are actually quite a lot of different species of dandelion, but often they're referred to as dandelion aggregates. These are not only great plants for pollinators when they're in flower, but when they go to seed, a bird called a linnet absolutely loves to come and eat the seeds of the dandelion as well. Now over here we've got a plant which lots of you will be very familiar with. This is white clover. It's actually not native to this country. The clover that is native is the red clover, but they are liked by bees anyway. And another very low growing plant here is called plantain, and it has this long sort of flower that then turns into these seeds, and we can see that these are actually seeds now. And this is quite a common plant throughout sort of grassland areas. Right, now I'm over by the mugger, behind the mugger, and I've got a couple of different wild native hedgerow trees. So this is hawthorn. In the springtime it has lovely white flowers which are perfect for pollinators, and then once these flowers have been pollinated, the ovules turn into hawthorn berries, which once it gets to kind of autumn time, these are a bright red colour and are feasted on by many different birds. If we move along a little bit, we have an elder tree which produces elder flowers, which are those kind of white spray sort of flowers that people often use to make elderflower cordial. And once those flowers have been pollinated, we get elderberries, and people make elderberry cordial as well. So not only is this shrub tree fantastic for wildlife, humans often make the best of it as well. Also over in the corner by the mugger, we have this fairly young oak tree. Now, oak trees are fantastic. They often supply a habitat, an area to live for over 200 different species of creatures. Now, this could be a bird that's nesting high up in the tree in the canopy, or it could be a woodpecker that's made a hole in the tree and it raises its young there, or it could be a moth that feeds on the leaves, or it could be a parasitic wasp that makes a gall in one of the acorns and makes this really strange looking structure. Lots and lots of different things using this phenomenal tree. We've just been treated to a little bit of sunshine. Normally we'd see lots and lots of butterflies using this great spread of bramble here, but the butterflies tend to be most active when it is sunniest. However, if we look a little bit closer at these lovely pink flowers here, we can see that there's a lot of pollen on the ends of those anthers. We've got a hoverfly that's using the flowers up there, and then if we look a little bit higher up, we might not be able to see on this video, but there were lots and lots of different bees all using these flowers as a food plant. So just the end of that call there was the call of the chaffinch, one of our obviously native birds. There it was again. This beech hedge is really fantastic for supplying a little area where the birds can roost. In fact, Mr Leake actually saw a firecrest, which is Britain's smallest bird, just along here back in the winter time. It's a lovely little bird. It has sort of olivey green browny feathers, but then on the top of its head it has this amazing orange crest, and then there's also another little bird called the gold crest, which is very similar in size, but the gold crest has a slightly yellower crest on its head, and it has a white eye stripe that differentiates it from the firecrest. Here I've got a very good example of the two different species of thistle that I mentioned earlier. So this one we can see is a hairy stemmed thistle and is therefore spear thistle, and it's also got quite big flowers. If I move along a little bit though, we can see that this thistle doesn't have a hairy stem, and the flowers are quite a lot smaller, and this is therefore creeping thistle. Here we've got a lovely array of flowers that people would again often sort of think are weeds, but actually all provide a really great habitat, and a lot of these are food plants for several varieties, species of moth. We've got umbellifers here with some red red soldier beetles. It's very windy today, as you can see. We also have a type of species of willow herb here, which has furry stems and furry leaves. We've got our thistle, we've got our nettles, and really it's just providing a really lovely wild habitat on the edge of the marsh. This is an actinic moth trap. It's ready to go. It's about 9:45 now, so it's just getting dark, and hopefully in the morning we will have lots of lovely mothy creatures in the trap. So what happens is the moths are attracted to this bright purpley white light, and then they fall down this gap here, and then they rest in the egg boxes until the morning. So fingers crossed we get some good ones. It is 7:45. Doesn't look like there are a huge number of moths in here, but you can see we've got a lovely grey and yellow moth there, which is a footman, and another one of the same kind of moth over there. So need to turn the light off and then go through it. Sometimes the moths don't all go in the trap. Sometimes you'll find them around on the walls where they've just come to rest, and this particular one here is called a riband wave. This is the book that I write down all my sightings in. Clearly my writing gets a bit messy, and usually, so July, sort of this time 2 years ago, you can see we got quite a lot of different species, and last year as well, you know, we had quite a lot of different species and a lot of moths of those species, so we'll see what we've got today. This is one of my all-time favourite moths. I don't need to look this one up in the moth guide. This is called a buff tip, and if you hold it this way, it looks like the end of a twig. It's meant to look like a part of a silver birch tree twig. It's really, really cool, and one of my favourites. And it looks like it's got this soft little head, very cute. And what it's sitting on is an egg box. Moths really like going on egg boxes, so you have a few of them in the trap. You'll see that some moths are actually really quite tame, and at this time in the morning they're a little bit dozy, and you can see this buff tip here really is quite happy to sit on my finger. And if I show you this way, you can see where its eyes are, there are those dark spots there, and in the light this really is a very, very beautiful moth. I mean, it's always beautiful, but especially obvious here, and you can see that its wings fold down. This is just its resting position. Such a beautiful moth. So I'm just going to go and put this somewhere where it will hopefully not get eaten by anything. Sort of tend to put them on areas where it's likely they're not going to be spotted by birds. That's kind of the whole point of them. And you can see that it just looks like a bit of twig. Just fits in nicely there. In this egg box we have a moth here called dark arches. Now, when I started doing mothing, I would be looking at the field guide all the time, but I've got to know some of the more common ones for each time of year. This dark arches here has a little bit of red on its sort of where its head is. This is just where the scales have worn away, and you can see the keratin that is left behind. So it's, you know, just a sign that this is a bit of an older example of that particular species. Over here we have this little brown job, and I will just need to have a look at my field guide in order to identify that one. So there are plates in the middle, and these are all the different moths that, or macro moths that you find in this country. And then you kind of, well, the way I do it is I kind of flick through until I find something that looks similar, and then I kind of already have a little idea, I just need to check. You can see that there's a moth here that looks quite similar. So what I'll do now is I'll look at the information on this page number here, 282. Oops, too far. Is it 282? Where's it gone? No, 382. Can't even read my numbers. There we go. Uncertain. So it tells you the size of the moth. It tells you a bit about the description of the moth. It tells you similar species, flight season, and this is really important, the flight season, because if you think you've seen a moth but it's actually not meant to fly at that time, then it's unlikely to be that moth. And then it tells you a bit about larval food plants. So if you wanted to attract it to your garden, then you would maybe plant some of those larval food plants. And it also tells you the status and distribution. So that's fairly certain, you know, one generation mid-June to mid-August. I'm pretty sure this is called an uncertain, which is quite funny really. The final moths I can show you are still in the trap. They have just rested on the wood. This is a common footman moth. There are lots of different species of footman moth, but these ones are a common footman. They're quite pretty. This lovely silky grey colour and the yellow leading edge on the forewing there. Now, unfortunately, that is our total list for today. 1 buff tip, 2 dark arches, 2 uncertain, and 2 common footmen. Now, like I said earlier, this is quite unusual. I mean, we had more in June, and that's in France, but sort of this was last year, and at this time last year we had lots and lots of moths. I mean, it was a bit chillier last night, probably getting down to about 10 degrees, but yeah, quite surprising and quite unfortunate. But you know, I'll show you my field guides. I have a few different field guides, and you know, there's just such a huge variety of moths that can be seen both in the day, which surprises people, and in the night time. Look at these beautiful underwings, lovely. I've always wanted to see one of those, but haven't yet, so I have to keep that one on my list to see. Oh, and some lovely tiger moths there as well. You know, there really is a huge array of different moths that can be seen in this country. About 2,500 in actual fact, and this book here, this covers micro moths and macro moths. My other field guide, this is just for macro moths, and this is my micro moth book, but the micros are definitely quite difficult to identify the difference between some of them. Some of them are easier than others. We do get this one occasionally, Agapata humana, and you'll notice that a lot of these only have Latin names. They don't have these common names like purple bordered gold, which are quite descriptive of those moths. So, unfortunately, folks, that's it for this morning. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the natural history around our area. There really is such a variety of creatures, great and small, plants, trees, that you can really get interested in, and I know that I'm interested in all of those things. Have a good day.